Charles Manson. The name resonates with people of all ages, echoing through generations with absolute infamy. But where did the name gain its unforgettable stigma? I suppose it all began when Kathleen Maddox, a 16-year-old girl, fled her religious and oppressive grandparents and met a young man named Colonel Walker Scott. Maddox plunged into a life of alcoholism and prostitution, meeting Scott on the rocky path along the way. On November 12, 1934, Maddox gave birth to a child in Cincinnati, Ohio, and named him Charles Miles Maddox. Soon after the child was born, Scott left Kathleen, who married a man named William Manson, giving Kathleen's son his last name. The marriage was short-lived, however, and Maddox was sent to jail for armed robbery, sending Charles to live with his religious aunt and uncle. Ironically, throughout the rest of his childhood, little Charlie Manson was in and out of boys' homes after consistently burglarizing stores. In 1955, Manson married a waitress named Rosalie Willis, and they conceived a child together. Manson was soon arrested and sentenced to 5 years of probation for stealing a car. In 1958, Manson divorced Willis, who gained custody of their child, and in 1959, Manson forged a treasury check and was sentenced to 10 years in prison after carrying out his probation. In prison, Manson became strongly interested in the Beatles and learned to play the guitar from the mobster Alvin "Creepy" Karpis. By 1966, Charles had chosen his new career path, musician and songwriter. Manson was released from prison in 1967 but begged prison officials to let him stay. When they refused, he moved to San Francisco. Within a month, Manson met Mary Brunner and moved in with her. In May of 1967, Manson met Lynette "Squeaky" Fromm, Ruth Ann Morehouse, 19-year-old Patricia Krenwinkel, and 20-year-old Susan Atkins, as well as getting Mary Brunner and Atkins pregnant. He also auditioned for a record company but didn't get signed. In May of 1968, Brunner gave birth to Valentine, Charlie's son. Manson family members soon met Dennis Wilson, a member of the Beach Boys, and in that same month moved in with him. In the summer of 1968, the Manson family moved to Spahn Ranch, maintaining their welcome due to Squeaky's sexual relations with George Spahn, the ranch's elderly owner. In September of 1968, the Beach Boys recorded one of Manson's songs, originally titled "Cease to Exist," but later renamed "Never Learn Not to Love." The song was placed on their album released in December called 2020. Manson, frustrated that he'd still not been signed by record producer Terry Melcher, traveled to Melcher's former home on Cielo Drive, unaware that he no longer resided there, and found the home's new resident, Sharon Tate. Weeks later, Manson family members Bobby Beausoleil, Atkins, Brunner, Bruce Davis, and Charles himself traveled to music teacher Gary Hinman's house after a bad drug deal and cut off his ear. Later, Beausoleil shot him and used his blood to write "Political Piggy" on the wall. On August 8, 1969, Manson told the family it was time for Helter Skelter and commanded Krenwinkel, Atkins, Tex Watson, and Linda Kasabian to change their clothes, grab knives, and leave a message, something witchy. Around midnight on August 9th, the family members arrived at 10,050 Cielo Drive. They immediately came across Stephen Parent, 18, in his white Rambler. Parent had been visiting the house's caretaker, William Garretson, and had hopped in his car to leave when the family arrived. Watson approached Parent's car and shot him point blank. The family spied Wojtek Frykowski asleep on the couch and Abigail Folger reading in the bedroom. Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring were talking in the bedroom when Atkins forced everyone to line up in the living room. Watson tied a rope to Sebring's neck, wrapped it around the rafter, and tied it to Tate's neck. Sebring, a hairstylist to the stars and longtime friend and lover of Tate, defended her in her pregnant state, earning him 2 gunshot wounds from Tex. Atkins tied Frykowski's hands with a towel, but he liberated himself and ran to the lawn. He was then shot down, beaten with the gun, and stabbed 51 times. Folger also attempted to escape, but was caught and stabbed 28 times. Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant with the child of her husband of less than 2 years, known for her beauty and small roles in films, was all alone in a house with murderers. She asked for mercy one more time, but was told by Watson, "I have no mercy for you." Then, Sharon Tate was stabbed 16 times. The killers placed a bloody towel over Jay Sebring's face and printed the word "pig" on the door in Tate's blood. The next morning, Winifred Chapman, the housekeeper, arrived at 10,050 Cielo Drive finding the evidence of a massacre. William Garretson, the caretaker, was arrested, the police finding it suspicious that he was the only living person on the residence, yet claimed to be completely unaware of the murders that occurred less than 100 feet from him. After giving Garretson a polygraph and confirming it was possible he'd been unable to hear the murders over his music, police released him from their custody. On Sunday, August 10th, Rosemary and Leno LaBianca returned home from a weekend away. Early that morning, Manson, Watson, Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten arrived at the LaBianca residence, choosing this particular family to terrorize because Manson had once attended a party next door. Charlie entered the home, woke Leno, who had fallen asleep on the couch, and tied his hands. Then he retrieved Rosemary from the bedroom and followed suit. Then Charlie left the residence. A pillowcase was placed around Leno's head and a lamp cord was tied around his neck. Then he was stabbed 26 times. Rosemary, who'd been taken to the bedroom shortly before her husband's murder, was then stabbed 20 times by Krenwinkel, then another 16 times by Van Houten. Krenwinkel carved war into Leno's stomach and in the LaBianca's blood wrote "Death to Pigs" and "Rise" on the wall. On the fridge, the family wrote and misspelled "Helter Skelter." At around 8 p.m., Rosemary's young son, Frank, returned home to find no one else there. Alarmed, Frank called his sister from a payphone and she arrived at the house with her boyfriend, stumbling upon the bodies of Leno and Rosemary. So what was the reasoning behind the Manson family's brutal murders? Nearly all of their actions can be traced back to Charles Manson's anticipation of an impending race war. He'd expected the war to be well on its way by the summer of 1969, but since its progress was disappointingly slow, he chose to take matters into his own hands. After tying Rosemary LaBianca up, he stole her wallet and left the property, driving to a gas station in a neighborhood heavily populated with African Americans. He left the wallet in the restroom of the facility, hoping officers would assume a black person had committed the murders, but to his dismay, nothing ever came of the carefully planted evidence. Manson's family, under the influence of various drugs, had been convinced that Charles was Jesus Christ. During parties, Charles would reenact the crucifixion and explain that at the peak of the race war, he would lead the family to an underground city of gold beneath the desert. Black people would ultimately be the victors, but would be unable to run a society by themselves. In response, Charlie and the family would leave their paradise and rule the world. Charlie's beliefs were also greatly influenced by the Beatles' White Album, which he believed contained many coded messages referring to the race war, especially in the song Helter Skelter. He also interpreted the Bible's Book of Revelations as a play-by-play of the coming war. Thanks to a confession by family member Susan Atkins to another inmate after the Hinman murder, the family was tracked down for the Tate and LaBianca murders, which tainted the free love movement of the 1960s and ushered in a new era of publicized drug use. Viewing the horrific Manson murders as an effect of these hallucinogens, President Richard Nixon initiated the war on drugs, attempting to put an end to these violent reactions. Manson was originally given the death sentence, but it was later changed to a life sentence. He is currently serving at Corcoran State Prison in California. Although many of Manson's original followers are gone, he continues to gain recognition and even admiration from within prison, including his recent fiancée, Afton Elaine Burton.
Remorse for what? You people have done everything in the world to me. Doesn't that give me equal right? I can do anything I want to you people at any time I want to. Maybe I haven't done enough. I might be ashamed of that, for not doing enough, for not giving enough. Maybe I should have killed 400 or 500 people, then I would have felt better. Then when I felt like I really offered society something. You know, if I wanted to kill somebody, I'd take this book and beat you to death with it, and I wouldn't feel a thing. You've got it stuck in your brain that I murdered somebody. What do you want to call me a murderer for? I've never killed anyone. I don't need to kill anyone. I think it. I have it here.